All right, guys, welcome back here. This time we're going to talk a little bit more about the FPS template and a couple of the character systems, namely the health system and the respawn system. And then in a future video, we'll go through the weapon system stuff. So right now we are looking in the prefab for our character. And then we have certain transforms that we'll use for our weapon animations. This is for the weapon recoil when you're firing. We move the animation socket and the name tag above the character. These all get added in the first person character authoring. We have the health authoring component here, which gives us our max health. And we also have this VFX attribute settings. This will be for spawning our death particle animations when we get killed. We can look at the name tag really quick. This is interesting because this is using the UI toolkit and not the old UGUI canvases that you might be used to. So this is new, I think, for the UI document to have world space settings here. This is part of the panel settings in the UI toolkit folder here in the project. You'll see here we have a render mode, and that can be screen space overlay, which is the usual default, but we also have a world space setting here that if we set, we can change how the panel actually looks. We can actually show that real quick. So if we drop settings here, drop the player assets there. This does not change the size. The size can be changed in UI Builder here. And that's in the text fields here in the inspector for the hierarchy. But we do want to change all this back. Okay. So here is our health authoring component. We'll just have a max health, which is set in the inspector, and then our current health. There is also a function here in our struct that just returns whether this character is dead or not. So if the current health is less than 0, it'll be dead. We'll use this for checking for respawn and also spawning the animation death effects. Speaking of the death system, this one will be running on the server only here. There will be a client system as well, but for our server side, we are just going to be checking all of our entities with health and the first person character component, and also make sure that the delayed despawn is disabled. We'll check on the respawn system here next, but it is just a component that can be enabled or disabled, so you don't have to worry about adding this component to everything that dies. It needs to respawn. So here in the character death server job, we're just sending it the command buffer, our game resources, respawn time, which is part of the main game scene, is just one of the singletons that has all of our settings and stuff for our game in it. The gameplay maps we explained last time was just the kind of the dictionary of your character players with the network connection that they belong to. And then we'll have a list of the delayed despawns that is enabled. If they are disabled, they won't show up in this list. Basically, what this is doing is looping through all of our characters and just checking if they're dead. And if they are, we check that they are still connected. So we have our gameplay map, we check the connection entity, and then we just make sure that that player is still connected. If this is null, that means they've been disconnected. So we're not going to have to respawn them. All right. So on the client side, we do much of the same thing, but we are just looking at the character component and whether or not it has delayed despawn enabled, which would have been happening here on the server side. With this enabled, we basically just need where we are going to spawn our death effects, which is what's going to be used for the local to world component for. So here we have a has process death. It's a byte, I believe. Yeah, it's a byte. So by default, it's going to be 0. And then once we get through spawning our effects, then we'll mark it as 1. And here to create the effect, we'll just create the entity and then we'll add a VFX hit request, which I believe is part of the actual VFX system. And we will give it our location, the type here, which we made in the VFX system we'll look at in a second. And we give it the normal, which is pointing straight up. For the delayed despawn, this just has a component for the number of ticks that we're going to be delayed by, and then whether or not it has already been assessed. So to have a enabled or enableable component, you just need to have this interface, and I think you need to, for the netcode, you'll need to have this ghost enabled bit attribute for your component. So for the delayed despawn job, all we're doing is looking at the resources. I think this will be for the despawn ticks, which is the wait to respawn, and whether or not the delayed despawn is enabled on the entity. Here we have a lookup for all of the child objects, which everything that is parented to another game object will get this child entity component onto it. And then we also grab our colliders as well. This system is running on both the server and the client as well. So here in the actual job on the server side, we are just going to be waiting for the appropriate number of ticks, and then we just straight destroy the entity there. If we're not the server, so on the client side, what we'll do is we are just going to disable the rendering on the client side as soon as it needs to be respawned. We're not going to destroy the entity, but we just disable the rendering. And this will just go through all of the child objects that we had in our prefab, and then this. For this, it will remove the material mesh info component. So this is basically disabling the renderer on it. Once we disable the rendering, we'll also need to disable the physics as well. So on the server side, you'll disable the physics when you need to despawn. After that, we'll set our has spawned, has handled pre-despawn to 1. Okay, here in the server game systems is where we handle spawning the character. So here in our game server system, we are calling, after we handle the join request, we call handle characters. And in handle characters, here is where one of our jobs is spawning the characters after we handle the connection and all that stuff. Here. So here we find all of our entities with spawn character that we added during the death system here. And here we will grab all of the spawn points that are in the world. We'll get their local to world locations and whether or not there are any other characters on those spawn points. We looked at a little bit of this during the last video as well. But yeah, it is just the same thing here. We will grab a random spawn point, test to see if anyone is there before we actually spawn the characters. Here we are just taking care of new player business here, and also instantiating a new weapon. So every time you die, you'll get a new weapon, and this is setting your player name as well. Okay, so we've covered the health, dying, respawning here. The visual effects system is basically just spawning a VFX particle system, which is up here under our art VFX. These are our death sparks. There's laser hits. Each ammunition has its own particle system here. And we have this enum to keep track of which types are being spawned. There's a bullet type as well. And this other is what we're using for the death animations. Here are the properties that we're setting for the VFX graph in order to play the particle system. Each particle system, I believe, has like 3 parts to it. We can look it up here. Won't go too big into it here, but there are events that are used to trigger these 2 different parts here. One is the hit circle, and here's the burst. You can kind of see it down here. I don't know if we can actually play it now or not. But anyways, here is one event. Here is start on high count for this part of the section. The first part is here, start low count. And then this is for your debug. If you wanted to just play it, you can do it that way as well. And that'll trigger them both. Right, so these property names for the different pieces of the particle systems, we can trigger them with these events for the low, mid, and high count. They also have position, direction, spawn count, and all that. And this system here is just going to be going through all of the VFX hit request that we put in for like our death system. Added this VFX hit request for these types and setting all of the properties that we had here. So this will go through all of the hit requests that are out there, and then it will instantiate the prefabs in our resource prefab list here. This is why this list needed to be exactly in the same order that the enums are in here. So it is using this enum numbering to spawn the correct prefab from the game resources. See the game resources here. These need to be in order. And basically we just instantiate it. We will add it to our dictionary, and then we set all of the parameters that we got from the hit request. So it'll be whether it's positions, normals, the spawn count. We'll send events to trigger these various pieces of the particle system. So in the next video, we'll look at the weapon systems, and we'll kind of dig more into how that is working for your bullets and your hit effects. We also have our name tag system here that we had looked at earlier. This will grab the UI document and then set the player name to it. And also it will instantiate the actual name tag itself, which we have saved to the game resources singleton here. Another thing to note is that the name tag proxy is a cleanup game component data. This component data will actually hang around after the entity that it's attached to is destroyed. And I believe that is because that is the UI document is a managed type, so it needs to be handled separately. So we have this cleanup name tag here that just goes through all of the cleanup components that don't have an actual name tag to it. And then we just clear it out and then destroy it. And then we just remove that component. Here in update tag position, this is just taking the camera and the position of that camera, your main camera, your first person camera, and it is rotating all of the name tags to point towards your main camera. So this is just a billboarding script. So all of the name tags will just always point towards you. And since this is client only, it's not going to affect any of the other players. So yeah, I think that is it that I wanted to talk about. Next time we'll go through the weapon systems and look at how all of that works, because there's quite a bit going on with the weapons themselves. But yeah, we will see you then.